You've been sold a 3,000-year-old scam, and you're paying for it with your life. Your work ethic isn't a virtue, it's a leash they installed in your nervous system before you were old enough to speak. You aren't industrious, you're successfully programmed. You feel it in your marrow right now, that heavy, leaden fatigue you call responsibility. You wear it like armor, proud of how much you can endure. You tell yourself this exhaustion is evidence of your character, that it separates you from the lazy, the weak, the undeserving. But your virtue is actually your cage, and the cage was designed before you were born. The scam of hard work is the most successful containment protocol in human history. It's a psychological operation designed to ensure you're too exhausted to ever become a threat. It convinces the battery that it's a hero for draining itself. They designed a treadmill, called it a ladder, and watched you run until your heart gave out. Because a tired man doesn't revolt. A tired man doesn't think. A tired man simply continues building a monument to his own erasure. Your exhaustion isn't a trophy, it's a receipt. It's the proof that the extraction is working exactly as the architects intended. To stop the machine, we must examine the blueprints. We must trace the first engine of extraction built in the desert and realize that the prison you inhabit today was designed millennia before you were born. We begin with the first blueprint, the original engine of extraction. The Great Pyramid of Giza isn't an architectural wonder. It's a psychological operation. Consider what the Pharaoh actually accomplished. He convinced 20,000 men to haul 2-ton limestone blocks across the desert for 20 years, not through chains, but through a story. The story was simple. Your labor serves the cosmic order. Your suffering purchases your eternity. They called it corvée, a system of forced, unpaid work that conscripted peasant farmers during the Nile flood months when their fields lay idle. Analyze the extraction math. 20,000 to 30,000 workers, rotating in seasonal shifts, sustained for 2 decades. A human engine running on belief instead of fuel. The scale is staggering, but the mechanism is more important than the math. They didn't need whips when they had words. Divine duty is a shackle that locks itself. The Pharaoh sold them a ticket to the afterlife, priced at exactly 1 lifetime of labor. And they paid it willingly, gratefully, because the alternative, exclusion from eternity, was unthinkable. Archaeologists excavated the workers' village at Giza. They found bakeries and barracks, an organized system designed to keep the labor force fed, rested just enough to function, and completely dependent on the state for survival. The workers received rations of bread and beer. They were housed in dormitories. They were sustained at the precise caloric threshold required to lift the next stone. They fed the workers just enough to raise the pyramid, but never enough to question who sat on top of it. This is the first principle of the labor trap. The extraction must feel like participation. The victim must believe he's building something for himself when he's only building a monument to his own exploitation. 1 man became a god. 10,000 men became dust. That's the exchange rate of belief. The Pharaoh's name echoes through 4,000 years. The names of the men who dragged the stones, erased. Their bones dissolved into the sand they excavated. Their entire existence reduced to a supporting role in someone else's immortality. And here's the part that should terrify you. Many of them were proud to do it. They believed their work ensured their own afterlife reward. The system had colonized their minds so completely that they mistook their exploitation for spiritual investment. This is the template. Religion was the softest form of the trap. Observe your own life through this lens. You aren't hauling limestone anymore, but you're hauling deliverables for a corporate mission statement you didn't write. The Pharaoh didn't need whips because he had purpose. Your CEO doesn't need chains because he has company culture. You aren't building a pyramid. You're building brand equity for a man who wouldn't attend your funeral, but faith is fragile. When the gods went silent, the masters realized they needed a more permanent way to break the human spirit, a method that's still being used on you today, every time you check your phone at 2 a.m. To understand how they colonized your nervous system, we have to examine the most terrifying demographic math in history. Sparta stripped away the gold paint of religion. They didn't hide the boot. They polished it. Analyze the Spartan state. The purest historical example of the strategist-laborer divide. A society that made the extraction mechanism explicit rather than mystical. Here's the demographic reality that made Sparta possible. 8,000 Spartans ruling over a population of helots that outnumbered them 7-1. 7 men in the field for every 1 man in the city. The math required terror to balance the equation. The helots weren't merely slaves, they were state-owned enemies. The Spartans had conquered the neighboring region of Millennia in the 8th century BC and reduced its entire population to hereditary serfdom. These helots farmed the land and produced food, enabling the free Spartan minority to live as full-time warriors and rulers. You weren't a citizen, you were a calorie source with a pulse. The warrior class extracted the helots' agricultural output as tribute, keeping them at subsistence level, low enough to work, poor enough to never accumulate power. But the Spartans understood something the priest kings of Egypt only intuited. When you outnumber your masters 7-1, math becomes dangerous. So they invented a solution that still echoes in every system of control. Each year the Ephors, Sparta's ruling magistrates, formally declared war on the helot population. Not a metaphorical war, a legal declaration that permitted any Spartan to kill any helot without consequence. Imagine a government that declares war on its own workforce every autumn, just to keep the fear fresh. This wasn't paranoia, it was policy. The Cryptia, Sparta's secret police, would hunt through helot villages at night, assassinating anyone suspected of leadership potential, anyone who showed too much strength, anyone who might organize resistance. The psychological function was precise. By keeping the laborer in a state of constant survival anxiety, rebellion becomes neurologically impossible. A mind focused on immediate survival has no capacity for long-term strategy. Fear is the ultimate distraction. While the helot broke his back in the mud, the Spartan sharpened his mind in the shade. The Spartans didn't work. They trained, they debated, they strategized. Their entire culture was built on the premise that leisure is required for power, and that someone else must pay for that leisure with their body. This is the equation they don't teach you. The strategist's freedom is purchased with the laborer's exhaustion. Every hour the Spartan spent perfecting his combat skills was an hour the helot spent feeding him. The Spartan didn't work because he understood the first law of strategy. Power is built in the shade, not the sun. We'll return to this principle in the final protocol because it contains the exit. Sparta used terror, but terror is expensive and loud. It requires constant vigilance, constant violence, constant reminders. Rome discovered a way to extract your life force that was so quiet, so clinical, that the victims actually helped calculate their own destruction. They moved from the blade to the ledger, and the accounting trick they invented is the exact reason you feel like you're falling behind. No matter how much you earn, Rome used accounting. The Roman economy was built on a foundation of human trafficking so vast that scholars estimate 10 to 20% of the empire's population, 5 to 10 million people, were enslaved at its peak. Aristotle had already provided the philosophical framework. He called the slave a tool with a soul, a piece of property, separate from its owner, yet human enough to operate complex machinery. Stop for a moment, look at your hands. Aristotle would call them separate tools. Your employer calls them headcount. Neither of them sees the person attached to them. The language has changed, the classification hasn't. Rome treated them like tools with expiration dates. The harshest application of this philosophy occurred in the Spanish silver mines. The historian Diodorus Siculus recorded what he witnessed in the 1st century BC. Slaves who produced revenues in sums defying belief for their masters, yet wore out their bodies both by day and by night, dying in large numbers because of the exceptional hardships, no respite, no pause, driven under the lash until death seemed preferable to another hour of existence. Deep in the Spanish earth, men prayed for death because sunlight had become too expensive. Observe the extraction math in its purest form, the ownership class. Men like Crassus, the Roman senators, the mine operators, viewed the laborer's lifespan as a depreciating asset in a profit equation. They calculated exactly how many silver coins your life was worth before you broke. Work them until they break, replace them, repeat. Crassus didn't see suffering, he saw a depreciation curve. If you break before you profit, you're a bad investment. Your current employer uses the same spreadsheet, they just call it human resources. The extreme exploitation occasionally produced resistance. The most famous was Spartacus's rebellion in 73 BC, an enslaved gladiator who escaped a training school in Capua and built an army of 70,000 to 120,000 escaped slaves that defied Rome for 2 years. They call him a hero. The Senate called him a glitch in the revenue stream. The system corrected the glitch with extreme violence. General Marcus Licinius Crassus crushed the revolt in 71 BC. His solution to the Spartacus problem was a marketing campaign written in dying flesh. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, the main road into Rome. Their crosses stretched for miles, a corridor of agony designed to be seen by every traveler entering the capital. 6,000 dying men lining the road to Rome, a billboard advertising the cost of defiance. The historian Appian noted that the crucifixions lined the road from Capua to Rome. Voltaire later called Spartacus's revolt a just war, indeed the only just war in history. But justice lost. The system won. The lesson Rome taught is the lesson every system teaches. It doesn't care if you work hard, it only cares that you generate revenues defying belief before you break. The system will consume you until you're ash, and then it'll hire your children. You don't work in a mine, but you do work in an open plan office designed to maximize your visibility and minimize your autonomy. The lash is gone. The Slack notification replaced it. The crosses on the Appian Way are gone. The LinkedIn layoff announcements replaced them, a public warning to everyone still employed. This could be you. The system will consume you until you're ash. But as the Roman Empire collapsed, the architects realized that physical chains weren't enough. They needed a way to make the prison legal, to make it so that even when you finally gained the upper hand, the rules would shift overnight to strip it away. You saw this happen in 2020. They first practiced it in 1351. Medieval Europe invented a story so elegant it survived for 1,000 years. They called it the three estates: those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. A common rationale held that peasants worked for all, knights fought for all, and churchmen prayed for all. They told the peasant, "You work so we can pray." It was the longest con in history. In reality, the serf was the worst fed and worst rewarded in this arrangement. Up to 85% of the population were peasants, and most were serfs bound to a lord's manor. They couldn't leave without permission. They owed the lord several days of unpaid labor each week on his personal fields. They paid rent in produce. They paid the church a tithe of 10% of every harvest. The lord didn't protect the sheep from the wolf. He protected his dinner from the neighbors. The protection offered by the manorial lords was a racket. They protected you only so they could continue to extract your surplus. The feudal order left peasants with only a fraction of their output for their own families, a built-in mechanism ensuring they stayed poor and dependent, generation after generation. Then came the Black Death. The plague hit. Half of Europe died. The survivors looked around. Suddenly labor was scarce. Workers had leverage. Peasants demanded higher wages. Lords panicked. So they called a meeting. They didn't negotiate, didn't offer raises. They passed a law. 2050, the Statute of Labourers. They made it illegal to be valuable. The law froze wages at pre-plague levels, despite a devastating labor shortage. It restricted worker mobility. It criminalized the market forces that were, for the first time in centuries, working in the laborer's favor. The moment the poor man had power, the rich man changed the rules. Supply and demand applies to everything, except your labor when it threatens their profit. The 14th century poem Piers Plowman captured the fury. Working men curse the king and all his parliament that makes such laws to keep the laborer down. This legal violence eventually produced a response. In 1381, the peasants' revolt exploded across England. Tens of thousands marched on London, led by Wat Tyler and a radical priest named John Ball. Ball asked the forbidden question that still echoes: when Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? He preached that from the beginning all men by nature were created alike, and our bondage or servitude came in by the unjust oppression of naughty men. He asked the forbidden question: who gave you the right to rule? They answered with a knife. Wat Tyler was killed during negotiations with the king. John Ball was captured and executed by hanging, drawing, and quartering. The revolt was crushed. The system adjusted, absorbed the shock, and continued. They didn't just kill the rebel, they criminalized the hope that fueled him. But here's what Ball understood: that the lords feared. The hierarchy was man-made, which meant it could be man-unmade. The exit exists. It always has. The final protocol will show you where. The physical chains are gone now, but the architecture remains. The castles have crumbled. The walls are still standing. Inside your head, this is the final evolution. The system no longer needs external enforcement. It's moved the prison inside your mind. The modern strategist no longer needs a whip. You carry the overseer in your nervous system. You flog yourself with deadlines. You chain yourself to metrics. You measure your worth in productivity units designed by someone who'll never know your name. You don't need a foreman when you have anxiety. You're your own slave driver. Watch your reflex. Notice what happens when you have an unscheduled hour. Feel the guilt creep in, the restlessness, the whisper that says you should be doing something productive. That guilt isn't natural, it was installed. You've been trained to confuse being busy with being safe. Somewhere in your development, you learned that a still body is a target. You stay in the quarry because the silence of the shade feels like a confession of worthlessness. Rest triggers the same alarm as danger. This is the program running in your nervous system. And until you see it, you can't stop it. The Pharaoh needed priests to convince you that labor served the cosmic order. The Spartan needed the crypteia to terrorize you into submission. The Roman needed crucifixions lining the highway. The modern strategist needs none of this. He simply installs the belief that your exhaustion is a virtue and watches you destroy yourself in pursuit of approval that'll never come. The modern strategist sleeps soundly because you're terrified of missing a deadline that doesn't matter. This is the wage trap. The illusion of freedom where you work harder than a medieval serf, but own less of your output. Consider the comparison carefully. A medieval peasant worked the Lord's fields 3 or 4 days per week. The rest of his time was his own. He kept a portion of his harvest. He had no commute. He observed dozens of religious holidays where work was forbidden. Economists estimate the medieval peasant worked approximately 150 days per year. You work 5 days per week minimum, often more. You commute. You answer emails at midnight. You take calls on vacation. You work 250 days per year or more. And after rent, taxes, insurance, and debt service, you retain a smaller percentage of your productive output than a 13th century villain. The serf knew who owned his labor. You've been convinced you're free. You own the hustle. They own the equity. Do the math. But there's a single variable in that equation. One thing the Pharaohs, the senators, and your current CEO are terrified you'll discover. It's the difference between being the stone and being the architect. And once you see it, the 3,000-year-old scam loses its power over you forever. But first, you need to understand why the trap keeps resetting. The Statute of Labourers never disappeared, it simply changed form. In 1351, Parliament froze wages by law, when workers gained leverage after the plague. Today, the equity holders don't need to pass a law to freeze your wages. They just have to manage the currency until your raise is eaten by the cost of existing. Inflation is the modern Statute of Labourers. It's a wealth transfer mechanism disguised as economic weather. Your salary increases by 3%. The cost of housing, healthcare, and education increases by 8%. The gap isn't an accident, it's extraction. You're not falling behind because you don't work hard enough. You're falling behind because the rules are written to ensure you never catch up. The fundamental error is confusing effort with leverage. The laborer thinks in addition. 1 more hour, 1 more shift, 1 more side hustle stacked on top of the main hustle, the arithmetic of exhaustion. The strategist thinks in exponents. 1 system that works while he sleeps, 1 asset that appreciates while he rests, 1 decision that multiplies through 1,000 employees. While you're trying to add more hours to your day, they're adding more people to their system. Hard work is linear. You invest 1 hour, you get 1 hour's worth of output. The ceiling is your exhaustion. The maximum is your death. Leverage is exponential. The strategist uses capital, systems, and other people's time to multiply output without multiplying personal effort. The ceiling is unlimited because it's not bound to a single body. You trade time, they trade value. You can never work hard enough to bridge that gap. The math doesn't allow it. But here's the unlock, the thing they never wanted you to see. Once you see the exponent, you can't go back to the addition. The moment you stop trading time and start trading systems, the 3,000-year-old scam loses its power over you. You step out of the quarry. You stop being the stone and start being the architect. Leverage isn't a business tip. It's sabotage. Every hour you spend building a system you own is an act of rebellion against 3,000 years of extraction. Every asset that works while you sleep is a middle finger to the Pharaohs, the senators, and the CEOs who designed the treadmill. This is why the Pharaoh could build a pyramid while the laborers could barely feed their families. This is why the Spartan could spend his days in philosophical debate while the Helot spent his in the fields. This is why the Roman senator grew rich while the miner prayed for death. This is why your CEO earns in 1 hour what you earn in a year. The mechanism has never changed. Only the costume chains become mortgages, the cryptia becomes the performance review, the lash becomes the notification, the cross becomes the layoff announcement. The restraints evolve to become invisible, but they still bind. Burnout isn't a medical condition. It's the feeling of a battery that's been drained by a parasite. It's your biology screaming that the deal is bad, that you're expending irreplaceable life force to compound someone else's wealth. The exhaustion you feel isn't the price of success. It's the proof that you're being harvested. If you're working hard and not gaining power, you're not building a future. You're maintaining someone else's pyramid. Stop building the monument. Start digging the tunnel. The door has never been locked. You just have to stop pushing against the wall and find the one that opens. The program can be uninstalled. The leash can be cut. But only if you see it first. Pharaoh, Ephor, Senator, Lord, CEO. The face changes. The title updates. The extraction mechanism remains identical. The pyramid builder believed he was purchasing eternity. The helot believed resistance meant death. The Roman slave believed escape was impossible. The medieval serf believed his station was God's will. The modern worker believes that if he just works hard enough, long enough, he'll finally break through. None of them were correct. All of them were controlled. Your capacity for pain isn't a virtue, it's a vulnerability they're exploiting. Your exhaustion isn't noble, it's the sound of you being eaten alive. You were handed a shovel and told to dig. You were never shown the blueprints. You were never invited to the room where they decide what gets built. We're building a sanctuary for the sovereign, for those who refuse to spend their lives constructing monuments to their own erasure. Subscribe and join us. The choice has always been yours. You just forgot you had one.